Developed and published by CD Projekt in 2020, originally for the Sony PlayStation 4, personal computer and Microsoft Xbox One, was that of Cyberpunk 2077. The premise of the original game was that it was set in the future where advanced technologies is pivotal in everyday life. And the main character, V, has to deal with a mysterious implant. The game was highly anticipated on early concepts of it showed revolutionary gameplay on details for a modern video gaming experience. But upon release, the game later had one of the worst launches for a title in modern video gaming, as there were countless problems with the game. Despite the fact that CD Projekt later spent years fixing the game's problems on repairing its broken trust with consumers for the disappointment that was Cyberpunk 2077, later versions of the fixed game proved to be an exceptional experience, but was never quite the original vision that the game first was. What was later known as the Voodoo Boys were originally a minor street gang in Night City in the 2020s. Often gathering around Night City University, they were refugees from Haiti and were known for performing weird and bizarre rituals, which were a combination of tribally based magic and synthetically created technology. With often nothing to lose, the Voodoo Boys would kill, torture, and rape anyone for little to no reason. Actions performed by the Voodoo Boys were considered inconsistent and unpredictable. University students would sometimes find the Voodoo Boys somewhat interesting as they were occasionally let into the gang, but not as actual members but low-ranking thugs to enforce the gang's will, or to be taken advantage of in miscellaneous ways. The gang never had a set location which served as their main headquarters. They often moved from place to place. Through the 2060s, global warming decimated Haiti in the Caribbean, and refugees flooded into the Dominican Republic, with the Dominican nation naturally being overwhelmed as a result. From there, further refugees migrated eventually to Night City, as the new Haitian refugees into the Night City were actually offended and aghast at what the Voodoo Boys did in their name and in the Haitian nation. Eventually, the Voodoo Boys had a reorganization of the gang, and while they still did criminal actions as before, they became much more secretive and often combined their African practices with the cybernetic technologies that they had acquired throughout Night City. In 2062, climate change destroyed the entire nation of Haiti, and the Voodoo Boys became the self-proclaimed protectors of the Haitian refugees and their interests within Night City. By 2077, the gang focused its interests on area of particular focus in Pacifica, with their main goal of being that of netrunners to rediscover the secrets of the old net and to uncover what existed beyond the Black Wall. Depending on what the player decides to do in the quests I Walk the Line, on transmission, the ultimate fate of the Voodoo Boys can vary. The Voodoo Boys were known as arguably the least encountered and known about gang in Cyberpunk 2077, as receptions to them were positive, but many wondered why they were only depicted in Pacifica, and even then only in certain regions of Pacifica. From information now known, due to the problems that were related to Cyberpunk 2077 during its development, Pacifica became the region of Night City with the least amount of development. Popular opinion had it that the Voodoo Boys were supposed to be seen or depicted throughout all of Night City, much like other gangs, but with their main focus being in Pacifica. But due to the game being released in the method that it was, the entire gang was restricted to Pacifica instead. The gang's importance in 2077 was regulated to the small aspect of the game where the player encountered the gang. Then that was it. They weren't necessarily mentioned nor depicted within the original game after the said examples. Theories further held that due to the Voodoo Boys specializing in hacking, they were supposed to be a more prominent gang depicted in the game, but due to the changes with the game's development, most of their details were removed, aside from the main story details depicted on mentioned previously, as they were the only gang to be affected as such. Due to dialogue on lore, they were supposed to be a major gang, and were later reduced to being that of a minor feature in Pacifica. To further the realization that the Voodoo Boys' concept wasn't fully realized, an online theory hollered that through details relating to the Voodoo Boys, when V dealt with Netwatch, everything about it didn't make much sense when looked at in particular detail. Bryce Mosley, the contact from Netwatch that V encountered, had implications that it wasn't the real agent, but someone else who had impersonated him due to a corpse being found with information having the deceased as the actual agent. Other details had locations being affected as V were to go through the related quests, as it was possibly intended to connect to something further, something more complex. More details had it that there were rifts between the leadership in the Voodoo Boys, and through dialogue in the game, these tensions were somewhat confirmed. Speculation held details of another interaction in Polish and Haitian Creole between an exchange of Netwatch and the Voodoo Boys. Observations had it that even though these particular clues were flawed, the conspiracy theory was nothing more than that. A theory. Even if there were originally more details that could have been done with Netwatch from what was depicted in the theory, it was much like the original concept of the Voodoo Boys, most or even all of it being unrealized. Sometimes a character could be forgotten because an entire concept for multiple characters was never fully realized.